You know, you've been sending us down some really interesting paths lately, like with all your questions about, what really matters,
Yeah.
the nature of reality, values, what brings true fulfillment.
Hmm.
It's fascinating stuff because these are questions that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries,
Yeah.
really since philosophy began. It all kind of falls under this big idea of ultimacy.
Right.
So
Yeah.
for this deep dive, we're going to kind of sort of put on our philosopher hats in a
Yeah.
way and explore this idea of the ultimate together.
Exactly. And, looking at the sources you shared, we've got entries from philosophical encyclopedias
Hmm.
touching on things like God, Brahman, the Tao. And what's so interesting is that these aren't just, some dusty old academic theories. These are really fundamental frameworks that have shaped how countless people throughout history and in all sorts of cultures have understood the world and their place in it.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool about it. We're not trying to just like, throw a bunch of jargon around and make it all sound super complicated.
Mm-mm.
We really want to get to the heart of what this ultimacy thing is all about
Right.
and appreciate just how many different ways brilliant minds have come up with to try and make sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it like a shortcut to understanding some really big ideas,
Mm.
hopefully, with a few aha moments along the way,
Yeah, yeah.
without it feeling like you're back in a lecture hall or anything.
Exactly, yeah. No pop quizzes here.
Okay, so let's get philosophical here for a second. When we say something is ultimate, what do we actually mean by that? Sounds simple enough,
Yeah.
but as with most things, the more you think about it,
The deeper it
the
gets.
deeper it gets.
Right. Yeah, it's surprisingly tricky concept to pin down.
Yep.
There's a view out there, some people call it particularism, and they argue that different cultures, different historical periods, they're just too different for there to be any kind of universal definition of ultimate. It's like these concepts are so deeply rooted in their own cultural context, you can't really transplant them.
Right, right. That does make sense
Yeah.
intuitively.
Right.
Like what one society might see as the ultimate truth or value, it might just be completely foreign to another.
Totally.
But then there's this other perspective, right, that says maybe, just maybe, there were some common threads running through all of this.
Yeah, there are some folks who are a little more optimistic about the possibilities of finding some common ground.
Yeah, yeah.
John Berthrong, for example, he suggests that our concepts, they don't just spring up in isolation. They develop through interaction and comparison.
Mm.
The meeting of different people, texts, practices over time. He argues that this kind of cross-cultural sharing, it's not just possible, it's been happening all along. And there are other theories, too, that point to things like our shared human biology or the way our moral understanding develops as potential bridges between different conceptions of ultimacy.
So it's like a mix of both, maybe,
Yeah.
like some fundamental human experiences, but then filtered through these very different cultural lenses.
Yeah, it's definitely a nuanced picture. And Ramon Ponekar, he sums this up beautifully when he talks about Brahman. He says Brahman is not simply the Christian god, and neither are, the Chinese Shangti or the Japanese Kami, and just different names for Brahman.
Right.
But he insists they're not completely unrelated either.
Yeah, yeah.
He suggests there's a kind of family resemblance where you have these shared characteristics, but no single perfect overlap.
Okay, so not exactly carbon copies, but maybe sharing some of the same DNA, so to speak.
Yeah.
Which brings us to this really interesting project, the Cross-Cultural Comparative Religious Ideas Project.
Yeah.
They were trying to navigate this tricky territory, right, of defining ultimacy across different cultures and traditions.
Mhm.
How did they approach this philosophically?
Their strategy was to define it in a properly vague way.
Properly vague. Okay, I like
What's
that.
The idea was to create a category that had enough shared meaning to be useful for comparison, but also enough flexibility to include all the different examples that we'd normally think of as being about the ultimate. Like, think of Paul Tillich's idea of an object of ultimate concern,
Okay.
or John Hick's concept of the real. These are very broad strokes, intentionally so.
Right. Vague, but for a good reason, like a container that's designed to hold all sorts of different shapes and sizes.
Exactly. And building on this idea, we have John Schellenberg, who offers a more structured definition, but still very encompassing. He proposes that being ultimate involves three key things. One, being the most real, which he calls metaphysically ultimate. Two, being the most valuable, axiologically ultimate. And three, being the source of the deepest fulfillment, so teleologically ultimate. He even came up with the term triple ultimacy for something that possesses all three.
Triple ultimacy. That sounds like winning the existential lottery. So
Wow.
to really qualify, something has to be the most real, the most valuable, and the most fulfilling, all at the same time.
Well, that's how Schellenberg initially framed it, but the source makes a good point that this might be a bit too restrictive. It could exclude some really important examples from different traditions.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
So for our purposes, we're going to work with a slightly more inclusive definition. We'll treat these three types of ultimacy as a disjunction, which basically means that possessing some combination of them, maybe being the most real and the source of deepest fulfillment, or just being valuable to an unsurpassed degree, that would be enough to be considered ultimate in our discussion.
Okay, so we're shifting from a strict checklist to more of a family resemblance approach. Different members of the ultimate family might share some traits, but not necessarily all of them. And that makes sense when we're looking at such a huge range of human thought, right?
It does. And it's also important to acknowledge that even this modified Schellenbergian view is still influenced by Abrahamic thought, particularly what's called perfect being theology. So while it can be helpful in understanding traditions like Hinduism and Taoism, it's not a perfectly neutral lens. Some worldviews, like certain Native American spiritualities, might not even operate with the concept of a single ultimate in this way.
Right. Important reminder to keep those potential biases in mind. Now, just to clarify some terminology here, because things can get a bit jargony, we have ultimate reality, which specifically refers to what's most real, the foundational ground of existence. And then we have ultimate more broadly, which encompasses any combination of being most real, valuable, or fulfilling.
Yeah.
And we'll be using terms like the ultimate and ultimates kind of flexibly to refer to this whole family of ideas.
Right. And philosophically, it's really interesting to think about the different kinds of things that people have conceived of as ultimate.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about concrete entities like God or Brahman, abstract states of being, fundamental properties, actions, even the very ground of being itself.
Wow.
It can be pretty hard to even categorize some of these things. And this philosophical flexibility in what can be ultimate, that's really key to appreciating the diversity of models that we're going to be looking at.
Okay, so we've got a handle on ultimate, this family of concepts clustered around being most real, valuable, or fulfilling. Now, let's talk about these models of the ultimate.
Okay.
What exactly do we mean by a model in this context?
A model is essentially a way of conceiving the ultimate. It's a representation of something that, by its very nature, is often seen as beyond our direct grasp.
So not a literal description, but more like a tool to help us wrap our heads around it.
Exactly. You know, the source uses the analogy of a city model.
Right.
It's not a life-size replica, but it shows you the key relationships, helps you understand the overall structure.
Yeah, like a simplified representation to make it easier to grasp.
Yeah, and in both science and religion or philosophy, the idea of a model implies that what you're trying to model, in this case the ultimate, is not something you can just observe directly.
Right.
And the model itself, it's not a perfect copy. It highlights certain things, simplifies others, maybe even distorts a few things to make it more understandable.
Okay, so a model in this sense is somewhere between a vague idea and a very specific concept or metaphor. It's this middle ground that allows for some flexibility.
Yeah, exactly.
And these models, they can be nested, right? Like how
Yeah.
Shankar's understanding of Brahman fits within the larger frameworks of Vedanta and Hinduism. It's models all the way down.
Right, we'll be using model at all those different levels, from very specific conceptions to much broader overarching frameworks.
So this act of modeling the ultimate, it raises some big questions, like why even bother? Why do philosophers and religious thinkers go through all this trouble to construct these models? And what are some of the challenges they run into?
Well, the motivations are pretty significant. For one, the specific model you have of something like God can really influence whether you even believe God exists. Like arguments against an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God, for example.
Right.
Those arguments might not apply to models that conceive of God in a different way.
Right, so exploring different models can open up possibilities that we might not have considered otherwise.
Exactly. It can broaden our understanding of what ultimacy could be. And dismissing the whole idea of ultimacy just because you have problems with one particular model, that's not really philosophically sound.
Yeah, if one road's blocked, there might be other ways to get there. And it's not just about arguments for or against existence either, right? Yeah.
No, not at all. These models shape how we understand religious diversity as well. Like, some models emphasize a plenitude of being, where the ultimate is so vast and rich that different religions could be grasping different but equally valid parts of it.
Okay. So there's room for truth in multiple traditions.
Exactly. And models of ultimacy also connect with our understanding of meaning itself. Although, as one of those sources points out, even if there is something ultimate, that might not completely answer all of our deepest questions about meaning and purpose.
So high stakes for sure. But it's not all smooth sailing in this modeling business, is it? What are some of the challenges that come up?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the first hurdle is just the question of whether anything ultimate actually exists. If you're convinced that nothing ultimate exists, then the whole project of modeling it might seem kind of pointless.
Right.
But even to argue against the existence of the ultimate, you need some concept of what that non-existent ultimate is supposed to be, which in a way brings you back to the realm of models, at least to some extent.
Yeah, you got to define what you're denying.
Yeah.
What about the coherence of the idea of ultimacy itself? Can there be something inherently contradictory about the whole concept?
That's another challenge. Stephen Mason, for example, he argues that nothing can be metaphysically ultimate in the way Schellenberg describes it. His point is that for something to be both fundamentally independent, existing a se, and also capable of explaining concrete existence, it would have to be both self-caused and concrete, which he sees as a philosophical impossibility.
Okay, so the concept itself might have some built-in problems. And then there's this really big one, the question of whether we can even talk or know anything about the ultimate, even if it does exist. The idea of ineffability, that it's beyond our ability to describe or comprehend.
Yeah, this is a common concern. The idea is that the ultimate is often characterized as being so radically different from our everyday experience. Beyond the world, totally unique, maybe even infinite. While our language and thought processes, they're built for describing things within the world, putting them into categories, dealing with finite things. So any statement we make about the ultimate might just be fundamentally inadequate.
It's like trying to describe colors to someone who's only ever seen black and white.
Exactly. And if our conceptual tools are just not up to the task, how can we even claim to know anything about it?
Right. So what are some of the responses to this challenge?
Well, one response is to just opt for silence, to acknowledge the limits of our inquiry and leave it at that.
Okay.
But for those who do want to keep exploring, one strategy is to distinguish between the ultimate as it is in itself, which might be beyond our grasp, and how it manifests or affects our experience.
Right.
Like, think of the distinction between the absolute Tao and the relative Tao, or the Godhead versus the revealed God.
Okay.
We might not be able to comprehend the former, but we can potentially understand and talk about the latter through its interactions with the world.
So focusing on the effects rather than trying to grasp the essence directly.
Exactly. And then there are specific linguistic tactics like the via negativa, defining God or the ultimate by saying what it's not, rather than trying to describe what it is.
Okay.
And the via eminentia, saying that God possesses any positive quality we can imagine, but to an infinitely greater degree.
Right, right.
Or using analogies, saying God is like something we know, but perfect and unlimited. And supereminence, where God transcends both a quality and its opposite. And then there's this more theoretical idea of equivocal predication, where the same words have completely different meanings when applied to the ultimate. Even with all these limitations, some thinkers argue that ineffability doesn't mean we should stop talking about the ultimate. It just means we need to be very careful and creative with our language.
It's a real challenge for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we do decide to try and model the ultimate, are there any common frameworks or categories that can help us organize all these different models? It seems like it could get really messy otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like knowing different types of trees helps you make sense of a forest, knowing the categories of ultimacy models can bring some order to this vast intellectual landscape.
Okay, so what are some of these categories?
Well, Hartshorne and Rees, for example, they came up with a set of questions, often shortened to ETCKW.
ETCKW.
Okay.
To categorize models of God, it stands for eternal, temporal, conscious, knows the world, and includes the world. So you can use these questions to see where a particular model fits. Like Schenker's pantheism, it would be ECKW. Hartshorne and Rees's own panentheism is ETCKW.
Right, a kind of philosophical checklist.
Exactly. And Wildman adds another important distinction. Personal or anthropomorphic versus impersonal or non-anthropomorphic.
Right.
And we can also categorize models by their functional roles. Like, is the ultimate seen as the creator, the underlying substance, the ultimate purpose, something that intervenes in the world, or something that provokes religious experience?
Okay, so lots of different ways to slice it. And then there's the question of quantity.
How many ultimates does a model propose? Seems a bit strange to talk about ultimates in the plural, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. But some models do posit multiple ultimates, like Zoroastrianism with its dualistic cosmology of good and evil,
Right.
or certain interpretations of Yoruba religion with its pantheon of Orishas. And even within monotheistic traditions, the Christian doctrine of the Trinity introduces a kind of multiplicity within the one God. But the source does caution against being too simplistic with this unity versus multiplicity thing. The reality can be much more nuanced.
Yeah, the lines can get blurry. But it seems like the most common way to categorize these models is by looking at how the ultimate relates to the world, the classic God-world problem, or more broadly, the ultimate world relationship.
Exactly. And that gives us four main categories. Monism, where the ultimate is in some way identical to the world.
Okay.
Pantheism, which is a specific type of monism where the world itself is seen as divine.
Okay.
Panentheism, where the world is within the ultimate, but the ultimate is more than the world. Merotheism, which is less common, but where the ultimate is part of the world, but the world is greater than the ultimate. And finally, dualism, where the ultimate and the world are distinct and separate.
Wow. Okay. A lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
So we've laid a lot of groundwork here. We've defined ultimate, talked about models, explored the reasons for modeling and the challenges involved, and looked at different ways to categorize these models. Now let's dive into some specific examples, starting with the concept of Brahman in Hindu thought.
Okay, great.
Brahman has a really long and rich history, evolving through the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and culminating in the various schools of Vedanta. Now, most Vedanta schools agree that Brahman is ultimately Sat Chit Ananda, which means existence, consciousness, bliss,
Yes.
and that Brahman often manifests in a dual aspect, a theocosm, comprising a personal god, Ishvara, and the cosmos, Samsara. Both of these are considered eternal in some sense.
Right.
They also emphasize the importance of direct, experiential knowledge as a way to understand Brahman.
Yeah, that's key.
But where the different Vedanta schools really diverge is in how they understand the relationship between this personal God and the impersonal cosmos within the theocosm.
Exactly.
So we have Dvaita Vedanta, which is dualistic. God and the cosmos are two fundamentally distinct realities, eternally coexisting. God is the creator and sustainer of the universe, but the universe is separate from God. Then there's Advaita Vedanta, which is non-dualistic and often interpreted as pantheistic.
Right.
In this view, the ultimate reality of Brahman is non-distinct from the deepest reality of the cosmos. The world as we experience it is seen as a kind of appearance or illusion, Maya.
Right, like that famous analogy of the rope that appears to be a snake in dim light.
Exactly.
You think it's a snake, but it's really just a rope.
So Advaita emphasizes the underlying unity, while Dvaita maintains a separation.
Yes.
And then we have the Bhakti schools somewhere in between.
Yeah, the Bhakti schools, like Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita, they offer a panentheistic perspective. They agree that ultimate reality is non-dual, but they also affirm the real existence of the cosmos as forming an inseparable and integral union with Brahman, like the relationship between a body and its soul.
Okay, that analogy is helpful. So in this view, Brahman is the soul of the cosmos, and the cosmos is the body of Brahman.
Exactly. Brahman is both immanent within the world and transcendent beyond it.
And the Bhakti schools often emphasize a more personal and loving relationship with God as well, right?
They do? Yeah.
And then we have figures like Ramakrishna who try to bridge these different understandings.
Yeah, Ramakrishna's big insight was that God is infinite and the paths to God are infinite. He saw the different schools and traditions as different paths leading to the same ultimate reality.
And contemporary Vedanta is still exploring these ideas. You have Philip Clayton Long looking at connections with process theology, Swami B.V. Tripurari Maharaj systematizing Ramakrishna's teachings, and Anantanand Rambutan developing a panentheistic interpretation of Advaita.
Right, lots of diversity within Hindu thought on how to understand Brahman.
Okay, let's shift our focus to the Abrahamic traditions now. Do we find a similar range of models for God?
Absolutely. Just like with Brahman, models of God in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam cover the spectrum from dualistic to monistic views, with panentheism and even hints of merotheism in the mix.
It seems like the concept of God has been very adaptable to different philosophical interpretations. Now, one of the most influential models historically is perfect being theology. What are the key ideas behind this view?
Perfect being theology defines God as the being who possesses all perfections to the highest possible degree.
So God is perfect in every way imaginable.
Right, and this usually includes attributes like omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence.
All-powerful, all-knowing, all good.
Exactly. Often you'll also see perfections like immutability, meaning God can't change. Impassibility, meaning God can't be affected by emotions.
Okay.
Aseity, meaning God exists independently of anything else. Eternity, existing outside of time. Simplicity, lacking any internal complexity. And necessity, meaning God's existence is non-contingent.
Wow, that's a lot of omni words.
It is, yeah. And creation in this sphere is often understood as ex nihilo, out of nothing.
Which tends to lead to dualistic interpretations.
Yeah, because God is seen as radically different from the created world.
Right. Now, this model draws from both the Jewish emphasis on a personal and active God and the Greek idea of a perfect and unchanging being. That seems like it could create some tension.
It does. In trying to reconcile these two ideas, the active God of Abraham and the immutable God of the philosophers, has been a major philosophical and theological challenge for centuries. Medieval thinkers like Maimonides and Aquinas, they grappled with the anthropomorphic language used to describe God in Scripture, often interpreting those descriptions metaphorically to fit the philosophical attributes of a perfect being.
So they were trying to bridge the gap between the biblical God and the philosophical God.
Exactly. And in more recent times, perfect being theology has split into different schools of thought. You have the classical theists who hold on to those Greek-influenced perfections like immutability and impassibility. And then you have the theistic personalists, sometimes called neoclassical theists, who emphasize God's personal nature and relationship with humanity.
Okay.
And that can lead to different understandings of God's attributes, like omnipotence and omniscience. Open theism, for example, is a movement within theistic personalism that sees God as being in a dynamic relationship with the world, where the future is not completely determined.
So God is involved and responsive to what's happening.
Right. And then there's deism, which came out of the Enlightenment. It's another mostly dualistic view, but God is seen as a creator who set up the universe with natural laws and then stepped back. Not really involved in the day-to-day.
Like a cosmic clockmaker.
Exactly.
So we've got a spectrum of mostly dualistic models of God. What about pantheistic views, where God is one with the world?
Pantheistic views have a tricky problem to solve. They have to explain how the diversity and imperfections of the world can be reconciled with the absolute perfection and unity of God.
Yeah, that seems like a tough one.
It is. There are some contemporary examples, though, like Michael Della Rocca's One Thing pantheism, which says the universe is a single conscious entity, and Quentin Smith's One Stuff pantheism, where everything is made of a divine intentional field. These views tie into the growing interest in cosmopsychism and panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is fundamental to the universe. But whether these unified realities can be called God in the traditional sense, that's still debated.
It's a big jump from a conscious universe to the God of religion. What about merotheistic models, where God is a part of the world, but the world is greater?
Merotheism is less common in theology, but there are some examples. Alfred North Whitehead's process theology, with its idea of a dipolar God, could be seen as having merotheistic elements. Charles Birch's panentheistic evolutionary view has some similarities too. And then there's Samuel Alexander's emergent deity, where God is the next stage in the universe's evolution, and Philip Goff's panpsychotheism, where God is the fundamental mind that's coextensive with space. He sees God as the ultimate source of consciousness and value, which gradually emerges in the universe.
So God is not separate from the world, but actually arising from it. It's an interesting twist.
It is. And then we have the panentheistic models, where the world is in God, but God is also beyond the world. These seem to be gaining popularity these days.
Panentheism. That's the one where God is both immanent and transcendent, right?
Exactly. Charles Hartshorne's process theology is a good example. He sees the world as a dynamic process that's internally related to God, and God is the soul of the world who influences and is influenced by this process. John Polkinghorne's bottom-up theology is also panentheistic, emphasizing God's presence and activity within the natural world. Stephen Bishop and John Persick have this teleological conception of divinity, where the supreme good is both the efficient and final cause of the universe, and love is seen as the embodiment of divine reality.
So a panentheistic view that connects God with goodness and love.
Right. And then there's Paul Tillish's influential ground of being theology. It's hard to categorize neatly, but it suggests a God who's both immanent and transcendent, the ground of all existence.
So lots of variety in how God is conceived, just like we saw with Brahman. Different models emphasize different aspects of God and different ways of relating to the world. And the extent to which God is considered metaphysically, axiologically, and soteriologically ultimate varies a lot across these views.
Exactly. A classical theist might say God is ultimate in all three senses, while a merotheistic view like Alexander's might not see God as metaphysically fundamental or the ultimate source of value or fulfillment in the same way.
Right, depends on the model.
They
Okay, let's move on to our final tradition, the Tao in Taoist and Ru thought. How is the ultimate conceived in this context?
The concept of the Tao emerged during a time of turmoil in ancient China. The old idea of Tian, heaven, as the ultimate authority was fading, and thinkers were looking for a new foundation for harmony and order.
Okay.
Early Taoist thinkers found this new source in the patterns and flow of the natural world. The Tao Te Ching is the earliest text that identifies the Tao as the ultimate metaphysical principle. It's also known as Taiji, the great ultimate, and Tian Tao, the way of heaven.
So the Tao is seen as both the fundamental reality of the cosmos and the guiding principle for human life.
Right. And there's this question of how the singular Tao gives rise to the multiplicity of things in the world.
Yeah, that's a big one in many traditions.
It is. Taoist cosmology generally agrees on at least 6 key aspects of the Tao. First, its immanence. It's present and active in everything.
Okay.
Second, it's ziran, which means self-so or spontaneous. The Tao acts naturally, without intention or external force.
He just flows.
Exactly. Third, its nature as non-being, wu.
Non-being. So not just nothing, but something more like a potential that precedes being.
Yeah, an unmanifest, undifferentiated potentiality. Fourth, its mode of action through wu wei, which means non-action or effortless action, acting in accordance with the natural flow without forcing things.
Kind of like going with the flow, but on a cosmic scale.
Right. Fifth, its generation of being in stages, from non-being to the one, then to duality, yin-yang, then to multiplicity, heaven, earth, and humanity, and finally to the myriad things. And there's this cyclical dynamic of return to non-being.
So it's not a linear creation, but a cyclical process.
Exactly. And sixth, its fundamental generative nature, sheng sheng, which means life. Like, it's this ongoing process of becoming.
So the Tao is constantly creating and recreating.
Right. Now, there's debate about whether those stages of creation are temporal or ontological.
Okay.
Meaning, did non-being literally exist before being, or are they just fundamental aspects of reality that are always present? The Tao Te Ching itself is pretty mysterious about this relationship.
Adds to the intrigue.
It does.
So how does this model of the Tao fit into those categories of ultimate world relations we talked about earlier?
It's generally classified as a form of impersonal panentheism. The world depends on the Tao for its existence and unfolding, but the Tao itself is independent and transcends the created order.
Okay.
It's like the relationship between a seed and a house. The house grows from the seed, but the seed exists independently of any particular house it produces.
So the world is in the Tao, but the Tao is more than the world.
Exactly. And the Tao is seen as both the efficient cause, the source of becoming, and the material cause, the underlying substance of the universe.
Okay. And like Brahman, the Tao is clearly metaphysically and soteriologically ultimate. The goal is to return to the Tao, Fan Tao or Huan Tao, and ultimately to non-being. But what about axiological ultimacy? Is the Tao seen as the supreme good in a moral sense?
Not necessarily. The Tao is often described as amoral, or even value contrarian, meaning it doesn't operate according to human moral categories.
Okay.
Some passages in the Tao Te Ching suggest that heaven and earth, which are manifestations of the Tao, are not benevolent in a human way. Wang Bi, an early commentator, linked this to the principle of Wu Wei, saying that true kindness might involve letting things follow their natural course without human interference.
So the focus isn't on moral goodness as we typically understand it.
Right. But there's definitely value in aligning oneself with the Tao and returning to this fundamental reality.
Even if it's not good in a human sense, it's still the ultimate truth, and union with it is seen as the path to fulfillment.
Yeah, and some scholars, like Isabelle Robinette, argue that the ultimate value lies precisely in aligning with the Tao's nature and flow.
Okay, so aligning with the Tao, becoming one with the flow of reality.
Exactly. And Poul Anderson suggests that the accomplished Taoist seeks to reside in that space between being and non-being, driven by a deep desire for truth and reality.
That's a powerful image. So we have explored a lot of different models here, Brahman, God, the Tao. The sheer diversity of these models can feel overwhelming. How should we, as philosophical inquirers, respond to this?
It's a good question. Some people, faced with all these different perspectives, they might just give up. They might conclude that the ultimate is beyond our grasp.
Throw in the towel, so to speak.
Yeah. But there are other ways to approach this diversity.
Well,
Comparative theologians, for example, they embrace this diversity as a chance to learn from each other. They study different models to gain new insights and deepen their own understanding.
so it's not about finding the one right answer, but about expanding our understanding through comparison.
Right, and the Theology Without Walls movement takes an even broader view. They see all these attempts to model the ultimate as data points that could reveal something about a shared underlying reality.
Okay.